Hello. So, today I'm going to talk about autobigotry. It's a word I'll say I made up. I looked it up online, couldn't find it. I could find auto racism. There are like three different definitions for what that is, so I'm going to not go into that so much, although it's a part of it. Thing is that I started thinking about auto racism. But then I got into there are other dynamics where the concept I'm thinking of applies. So I switched over to auto bigotry, which no one seems to want to talk about or no one has defined. So like I said, auto racism seems to be, for the most part, someone hating themselves because of their race, which that's one definition. Another one is people just hating people of their own race. The definition I'm going with, the made up one I'm going with, which I couldn't find online for auto bigotry, is you're defining how your group should be. So it's not so much I hate people of my group. It is this person's doing it wrong. And the one example, or one historical example, of course, would be we go back to Nazi Germany. At the time, big band music was popular. Of course, you go and you look at a big band album, look at the cover, read through the list of performers, and a lot of black players, a lot of Jewish musicians, a lot of people that the Germans at the time weren't very happy to associate with. So, big band music, that's decadent music, and a good German would never listen to it. A good German listens to polkas and Wagner and good. This is how you be a good German. And it didn't just stop at the music to listen to. It went on. There are lists of things that made you a good German at the time. And so that's what it is not when I say auto bigotry, auto racism. That's what I had in mind when I first thought of this. Before I looked up, auto racism online, is it's not that you hate your own race. It is you're judging how your own race should be, and that's a form of bigotry. Saying basically you're stereotyping your own race, and you're a good member. You represent us if you do this. You don't represent us if you don't do this. And so, of course, like I said, I started out with racism because within recent years it crops up various times. Jim Crow or Uncle Tom. If you don't agree with me, I'm going to call you a Jim Crow or an Uncle Tom. Now, not all black people do this. I'm, of course, talking about a specific race in this example. But there are groups. And that's one thing. When I should make clear here, when I'm talking about auto bigotry here, I'm not saying this is a problem with the group in general. I'm saying there are subgroups. There are organizations within each group which have their idea of how the group should be. And they will criticize anyone who doesn't match their group ideal, I should say. And so, somebody who doesn't support a specific thing, well, he's an Uncle Tom or he's a Jim Crow, or because basically it comes down to he doesn't agree with my idea of what a black person should be with. I'm saying that as if I was a black person. Yeah, I as a white person, it's not my point to judge how black people should be, other than the fact that they should be allowed to be however they want. There shouldn't be within the race a group of people saying, no, 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 you're being black the wrong way. That's no different than the Nazis saying that people were being German the wrong way. It's a form of racism or bigotry, since I'm using the more generic term. Now, one thing I will jump on to I don't know what term to use for this. So Autobigotry or something, where that's where an outsider comes in and tells you how you should be, which I'm not going to do. But yeah, we're in an election year, and that crops up from time to time. If you don't vote for me, you're not black. That was a racist statement. It wasn't quite auto-racist because he wasn't talking to people of his own race. So, auto-bigotry, where an outsider tells you how you'd be a good member of your own race. I don't know how you would do that one. But it's always hilarious. It always crops up in, anytime there's an election year, people crop up and start talking about how people of this race should vote for me because. And no, it's you're basically lumping them all into one group and saying this is how you should act. And it's just as wrong as auto bigotry in my mind. There is to some extent, I will add, there is a, to a lesser extent, or it's less noticeable, who you can associate with. So, I mean, there are groups within groups that don't like each other. We had this goes more, this is a less American thing, although it does exist in America, I would say. But this is, the international thing, and you've got the Hutus and I forget what the other group was. This was, back 20 years ago, and they were at war with each other. And the idea that, I could be a friend, I could be a Hutu and be a friend with someone from the other group was wrong. The Far East, Asia, there are Koreans and Japanese don't like each other that much. And we don't look at that as racist because there are two. It's a nation not liking another nation as opposed to Asians not liking Asians. So we don't look at it as racist. But it is sort of a form of racism if you look at it. But then you come to America, send your children to an American college, meet people of other nationalities and make friends with them, and write home to their parents, and their parents may, well, he's Korean, you can't be his friend. He's Japanese, you can't be his friend. So it's not quite the same because there's more, we don't look at that as racism, although to some extent it is, if you go by the old definition of race. But, originally race was about culture, it wasn't about skin color. So almost every nation had its own race, was considered its own race. Europe was filled with a bunch of different races. This was back before Darwin made it all about skin color. But we don't look at that as racism. One country not liking another country. But when we're looking at like auto bigotry, well, you can't be friends with them because they are from another. Now we're getting into what you're allowed to do. To be a good member of our race, you can't be friends with someone from that race. That crops up. I mean, that's modern day white supremacy. That's the biggest auto bigotry point there is criticizing people because they're friends with someone from another race. Like I said, I'm using bigotry instead of racism because it applies to other things. For instance, feminism. And so the radical feminists, the concept equal work for equal pay and equal rights, women being allowed to vote, got nothing against all that, In that regard, I am a quote-unquote feminist. But we, especially back when I was, going to college, it was more noticeable because I was seeing it more often. It's not as big today as it was back then, but it still crops up as we got the radical feminists. And there are people, they wanted to tell women how to be a woman. And, if you want to get married and raise children, well, you're hurting the feminist movement somehow. Of course, if you don't want to get married and get children, then the human race is going to die out eventually. But that's not necessarily your role in life, but it is an argument in favor of women who want to have children. But for some reason, there were these radical feminists who didn't like it. And as I said, not all feminists agreed with them. And so, I specify. In fact, we had back in the 90s, groups are coming out. There is at one point a very somewhat short-lived movement of women coming up being very vocal about what feminism means, and it just means we want equal pay for equal work, and we want the ability to vote and equality, which, like I said, I'm not against. And they were doing this because there were radical groups within feminism who were trying to tell women what to be. So other feminists were standing up and no, we've got to define this. When I say I'm a feminist, this is what I mean, because I don't want to be associated with these other women who are judging women for not being their ideal feminist, if that makes sense. Um, there were other groups who gone up and said, no, we just don't want to be labeled as feminism because the radicals have made it such a bad thing, and we don't even want to be associated in name because if I call myself a feminist, someone might associate me with the radicals. So there was a "Don't call me a feminist" movement also in the 90s. Neither one of these lasted very long. Like I said, radical feminism, it hasn't gone away, but it's died out. It hasn't been as popular as it was back, like I said, early 90s, late 80s when I went to college. So, but the concept was still there of telling women how to be a good woman, because that was autobigotry. And that was, the radical feminist movement was as much a sexist movement as men criticizing women was, because they were trying to tell women how to behave. And my third example, which is the LGBTQ community. And again, going back to the 90s, when bisexualism was growing in popularity, there were groups within the LGBTQ community who were against it because it undermined them somehow, in their opinion. Now, there were non-LGBTQ people, critics of the LGBTQ community using bisexualism to just sort of point out and say, hey, this doesn't make sense, But that didn't necessarily discredit the bisexual community of and by itself. But there were members within the LGBTQ community who said it did, and therefore they were against it. They were very critical about members of it. It was a weird time because, again, I was in college for part of it, or I working for a university, so I was seeing, reading the papers, seeing the arguments about it, and it was sort of weird to see because the LGBTQ group on campus, it was changing its name 3 or 4 times just because it wanted to add new people to it. At the same time, I'm reading articles about how bisexualism is wrong, written by members of the LGBTQ community. And so, to some extent, I was waiting to see the campus group split up into subgroups just because there were people within it being critical of people who were within it. Autobigotry. About the same time, we had a bunch of teenagers who were, with the whole, this is like the second sexual revolution happening again about mid-90s, and we saw teenagers starting to not argue, but come out. We're going to announce our alignment or our gender alignment or orientation or whatever. And so you were seeing, people would interview them because, this is a phenomenon. Let's, find out what's going on with it. It's news. And there would actually be arguments about, because teenagers don't think things through as much as they should. And so some of them were very much, well, we shouldn't have names for anything. It's all fluid. no names for anything. We shouldn't be, having subgroups or whatever, because who knows, tomorrow I might want to experiment with something else. They never called it experimentation, but that's basically what their argument amounted to. And so there are arguments within the teenage community who is trying to, yes, we're good people who support LGBTQism, but we don't know how to define it, and we don't want it defined, but some people want it defined and we don't. And so, not my paintbrush. So there are actually arguments within the community about how to do this. In the same way, about maybe 10 to 15 years ago, there were arguments, non-binary. There were arguments within the LGBTQ community of how do we define non-binary. And the people who defined themselves as non-binary were even arguing with each other because, no, you're doing it wrong. This is how it should be defined. No, I've got the right definition. You're the one doing it wrong. And so we had autobigotry. Now, if I had pointed this out at the time, I would have been called gay-phobic, LGBTQ, whatever. Because at the time it was I'm criticizing something that they're actually doing amongst themselves. And, pointing out that they are being bigoted towards each other is somehow bigoted of me. I don't know. But in reality, within the LGBTQ community, there was this large bout of bigotry going on. Around, I think, less than 10 years ago, I forget exactly when, there was an announcement where we're going to change the flag. So we got the rainbow flag, and then we got all the different color triangles off on one corner. And they wanted to add a triangle color for intersex. And the intersex, or people within the intersex community stood up and said, no, we aren't a part of all this. Another said, yes, we are a part of all this. And so again, this has never made the mainstream media, but there were arguments going on about, how to do things, and are we a member of the group or are we not a member of the group, and stuff like that. Going back, again, about 10 to 15 years ago when the Harry Potter movies were being made. Now, never read the books, never saw any of the movies, but I did see the headlines where they announced Dumbledore is gay. And from my understanding, nothing in the books say that he was. It was just they were making the movies. Harry Potter had a love interest, and so one of the screenwriters, script writers, decided, let's have him go to Dumbledore for advice. And Dumbledore makes mention of, there was a girl I knew when I was younger who I liked, and J.K. Rowling stepped in and said, no, Dumbledore's gay. Even though the book never says it is, in her mind he's gay, she doesn't want this line in the movie. So they took it out, and so that made big news. Now I mentioned this because within the past few years, J.K. Rowling has come out and criticized the transgender movement, saying she doesn't understand it, and children shouldn't be encouraged to do this. They should think, she didn't say it was wrong, really. She was more along the lines of, she doesn't understand it, and children should wait till they're older before they make any life-changing decisions based on it. Which makes sense. Suddenly she's evil. So, Dumbledore's gay, she becomes a great hero of the LGBTQ movement. Now she is evil from their point of view. So I guess she is an LGB-friendly, T-phobic person or something weird like that. But it changes, like I said. And again, it's an outsider giving their opinion, but suddenly their opinion's wrong. And so within the LGBTQ movement, there's disagreement now because she was a hero to some of them. And actually, speaking of transgenderism, they don't all agree on it. There are gays and lesbians who don't get it either. And they don't want to say it out loud because, again, auto-bigotry, we're going to be called haters for it and all this stuff. But at the same time, they don't get it. And so they just sort of keep quiet. Same way, like I said, black people calling other black people Uncle Toms, and there are not a lot of black people don't want to rock the boat. They don't agree yet. This person's allowed to have form their own opinions, and that doesn't make them a bad black person. But at the same time, I don't want to stand up and criticize the people who are criticizing them, because that's just seems disorganized, and it's not disorganized. It's fighting racism. It's admitting that there is racism within your group and fighting it. So that's it. Like I said, it's a phenomenon. We argue people. Only minorities can't be racist. Yes, they can. Not only can they be racist against other races, they can be racist against themselves. Sexists can be sexist against their own gender. It's wrong. It's one thing to point to another group and say they're wrong. It's another thing to point to your own group and say you're doing it wrong. When in reality, that's just as racist. That's it. Just wanted to talk about that a little bit because it's something it comes up, like I said, especially during election years. It comes up as people try to tell other racists how they should vote, because we're going to stereotype you all and just lump you into one group. Auto bigotry is the same thing. I'm going to stereotype all white people and say they all should all behave this way. It's just as wrong as if I stereotype another race. That's it. Have a nice day.